Yo, everybody. Thanks for joining us at the Work Talk podcast, the podcast where I talk to folks about their jobs, their business, their personal projects. I'm your host, John Salangsang, and today I have a cartoonist, a writer, an indie comic. He has many different titles. He's also a drinker to help him write, which I felt like we'll get along just fine then, because I like whiskey myself. We have here Alex. If you could tell the listeners and myself about your work.
Sure. I do a couple different projects right now. The main couple are a weekly webcomic called Decades of Inexperience, which I do for an online publisher called Antics Press. I do a monthly satirical comic strip called Mr. Butterchips for a literary magazine called Drunk Monkeys, which isn't as contrived as it sounds. It just sort of happened organically. And then a friend of mine created a graphic novel series called The Guitarist, which is going to start getting serialized by Antarctic Press this July, and it'll debut at Comic-Con.
Oh, so you're helping out. So you just told me all these things. I'm like, whoa, my mind's getting blown. You got your own. The one you work on is a decade of inexperience, right?
Decades of Inexperience and Mr. Butterchips are the ones that I write and draw.
And the other ones, it sounds like you collaborate and work with other friends or artists on their projects too.
It's a writer friend of mine named C.W. Cook. He's done some other projects for a couple indie publishers like Devil's Due and a couple other places like that. So we collaborated on this title, and he writes it and I do the artwork for it. And then we have a colorist who works with us as well. But yeah, it's definitely a far more collaborative project than the other ones that I sort of squirrel away and don't let anybody touch.
And I know you have your day job, and then on the side, you're doing all these projects, you're writing. How is all of your work doing? Do you have, you feel like you have a pretty strong fan base? Are you still growing it?
Yes, it's definitely still growing. I've never done anything that was, massively popular or produced on a larger scale. And honestly, I just in the past few years realized how much you have to produce to even start to gain a following, and just how constantly you have to manufacture material for people to even discover you. So with things like Decades of Inexperience and Mr. Butterchips and The Guitarist and, a graphic novel project that I'm writing and, doing short comic stories for different literary magazines and just having things continuously come out is one of the ways I found that people actually started to find me on, Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. And I absolutely loathe social media, but it's a necessary evil, in this day and age. And so I've grown accustomed to posting and being obnoxious on those social media sites because you have to, or else nobody's going to find you. Right. So yeah, I'm definitely still growing that. And I have, like my editor from Antics Press, where I do Decades of Inexperience, he's been a huge help. And I just got a news article on Bleeding Cool, which is a big comic site, from a friend of mine that I had made there. So yeah, definitely gaining some ground, which is good, but there's still a long way to go.
For Decades of Inexperience, that's the main comic you're working on. Did you describe to me and the listeners what that is? Like the what's it called? What it's all about? Yeah.
So it's a webcomic. It's actually in its third year now. The first 2 years it was more of I called it illustrated serialized flash fiction because it was far more prose heavy with just a couple of illustrations. And then this year we decided to change that format into an actual comic page, just to better use the medium and the combination of the visuals and the words. So it's in its third year, and basically what it is, in my opinion, in my the way that I was developing it, was it's me, in my early 30s or late 20s, and it's this road that a lot of people are on, where we don't necessarily have it all figured out by our 30s like our parents did. you know, the baby boomers and those older generations, you went to school, you maybe enlisted, you got a job, you had kids by the time you were 25. Basically, your life was over by the time you were, you know, 32. So, and not over, I mean, kids are, but I mean, you had it all
Yeah,
figured
no, I
out.
know what you
You
mean.
know, your life was, you know, rolling by this time, and I'm gonna be 38 this year, and I still don't know what the fuck I'm doing. So decades of experience is kind of a way for me to process that and reflect a little bit on, you know, maybe some not so clever life choices that I've made, but be able to make fun of that at the same time, and maybe people will, you know, find that reflective of their own lives. And so this the main character is Luke Carlin, and he's just, yeah, that's basically what he's doing, is, you know, going from day job and trying to pursue other things and finding his way in the world. And so that's, you know, I was thinking about resumes and jobs, and it's always blah 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 has 10 years, you know, 10
Uh-huh.
decades of
Hmm.
experience, you know. And so in my mind it was much funnier if it was decades of inexperience, because that's more along the lines
That's
of what I
clever.
am.
Yeah, that's clever. I did read one of your pieces
Oh,
where
cool.
your main character is talking about the modern age of having to be on social media and working long hours, and if you're
Yeah.
not, you're going to be isolated in this modern world. And then at the and then he's talking about he's trying to use dating apps to find someone, and at the
Right.
end, like of the comic strip, he's like a skeleton, and it's
Yeah, social anxiety still comes
it's
into play regardless of it's digital or in person.
right.
And you know, people, I mean, I don't want to make myself sound ancient, but you know, we grew up, the whole digital age thing was just coming about. I certainly, you know, didn't have the internet when I was a kid. So we we grew accustomed to it as we grew older, because it sort of started with our generation. But there's still a lot of the personal things that you inflect into those different, you know, communications, even online. But one of the great things about it too is, you know, I've met my publishers and editors and collaborators. It's all basically been online. So that's the wonderful thing about the internet too, as much as I malign it and, you know, complain
Hmm.
about it.
The irony.
Great tool, yeah.
It
Yeah, I wouldn't be on your podcast if it wasn't
was
for it, because you would know who the hell I was.
right, right. It's weird how that all works out.
Yeah, so it's not all
Technology,
bullshit.
yeah, it's evil and good. It's fucking crazy.
Yeah, it is. So that, yeah.
How did you get started in your line of work?
You know, I think like basically every other kid, I drew when I was young, and I think all kids draw. And then at some point, more pragmatic people realize that drawing isn't going to get them anywhere, so they stop doing it. And
Hmm.
there are those
Hmm.
of us who are, you know, just masochistic enough, or you know, maybe find they have a little bit of aptitude towards drawing, that you just continue on with it, and you know, find some sort of field to pursue. And it could be graphic design or cartooning, or, you know, what have you, animation. So I went for the comics because that's what I read as a kid, and that's what the medium that always drew me in.
Do you remember what it was like to write your first piece and be proud of it and have someone else read it and have that feeling? Because I know whenever I put stuff out there, whenever someone watches it, and whether it's good feedback or bad feedback, that's what I feed off of. And
Yeah, absolutely.
do you remember what it was like for your
Yeah,
first
because
experience, your first moment?
recently I hadn't done much writing until probably a couple years ago. I always sort of fancied myself being an illustrator, and, you know, being the next Mike Mignola, or just like an illustrator in the industry, and being the next rock star illustrator. And then very quickly realized that with, you know, the capacity that I have for illustration, that was never going to happen. So I wanted to maybe focus more on telling my own stories, and I took about a year and a half, 2 years to just focus on the writing aspect. And I did short stories and prose poems, and I wrote a horrific novel that was terrible, but it was a great learning experience. And I focused on the prose, which is why Decades of Inexperience kind of started out that way too. But I wrote a short story that was picked up by a literary magazine in 2016 or so, and I just felt that swell of pride. Somebody liked what I wrote.
You're like,
Yes,
I'm hot
somebody
shit. I made it, baby.
I don't know if I'll ever think that about myself, but it certainly felt nice to have somebody recognize, what you were doing and think it had some value enough to, put it on their website or their publication. So
how did they find it? You kept pushing content out from your Twitter and everything, and then someone randomly found it, or did you meet the people?
No, I submitted. Yeah.
Oh, you submitted.
I was submitting directly to literary magazines at that point, and that's kind of how I made these connections to start doing the other features that I've been doing online and meeting other publishers and editors, and it's just kind of blossomed from there and branched out, and now here we are.
Right. I want to talk. I want to talk about this notion of the grind. I recently posted it on my Instagram story. I was posting myself finishing work and talking about me going home and doing this podcast. And someone told me, "How could you work after work? Aren't you tired?" And I responded on that Instagram story. When you love what you're doing, it doesn't really feel like work.
Sure.
And when I saw one of your tweets, you mentioned how after work you spent 5 or 6 hours layering or doing your illustration work.
Yeah.
So I could definitely tell you're experiencing that grind and putting in those extra hours.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a necessity if you're trying to accomplish anything. And like you said, somebody asked, "Well, aren't you tired after work?" And yeah, that's an unqualified yes. Of course you are. Like you're exhausted when you get home. But if you have something that you're trying to do, you have an objective, you have a goal that you're working toward, it doesn't matter. And like you said, especially if it's something that you have a passion for, it doesn't make it feel as much of a slog as it could if I was coming home from work and then doing more work. as in like 2 day jobs. If I was, working for the county and then came home and had to do more office work, then I might hang myself. But being able to come home and, focus on something that I actually enjoy, it like you said, it sort of eviscerates that idea of it being a grind.
Right.
And you just are able to do it, and you have to do it.
Do you feel like a lot of people in the independent comic or arena like you, and as you could tell, I'm not from your world, so I don't know all the lingo. Sure. I assume a lot of them, I think anyone in the creative field has the life where they're the day job, and then they go home, and then they work on their side projects. Is that similar to a lot of your colleagues?
Yeah, and especially with something like writing or comics, they aren't exactly the most lucrative fields to get into. So most or a lot of people who are even professionals and have larger titles that fans may have heard of, a lot of them still have to have day jobs, because with a lot of comics, the wages that you get haven't really grown all that much since the 60s or 70s. It's pretty pathetic, the value that America puts on comics, which is very low. But in the past few years, the graphic novels, the more slice of life stuff, moving away from the superheroes and the fantasy, those have gained a lot more prominence, which I think people are starting to realize that comics really do have something to say. And especially with that combination of the words with the pictures, it's a very appealing package for somebody who maybe doesn't like superheroes or maybe doesn't even necessarily like to read. It's something they can pick up and enjoy.
Right. I do
like.
Right,
so to answer your question, yes, I think
yeah.
A lot of people have to have day jobs just to make ends meet. Yeah. Or one of the big secrets is if you're a comics creator and you have a significant other who makes a decent living, then you can focus on that.
There you go. So
most people are not rolling in the dough if you're making comics.
Yeah. But an easy way to make time for it is you got to find a sugar mama, and you'll be set.
Yeah, that's why my wife is back in school. That's what I'm hoping.
Yes, nice. You're on the path. You're on the path to doing what you love 24/7 once she gets.
I'm more than fine with being a kept man. You want me to be the stay-home dad and take care of the babies? I have no problem with that. I'm fine with subverting gender roles.
Yeah. I'll take care of the babies, and I can work on the things I want to do. Yeah,
fine by me.
Yeah, and you do your job.
Exactly. So yeah, that would be nice. I mean, I don't actually think on that, but it'd be nice.
That'll be funny. She's listening to this, and she's just looking at you like, Seriously? This is why
No,
you
no,
support me going to school?
we've had this conversation, and I think because she's, we're both feminists, and she is very into women empowerment, which is fantastic. So if she heard this, she would just say, "Yeah, that sounds about right."
Right.
We've had this conversation plenty of times. She'd have a problem with it.
So I do. So your guys' work, I think it's awesome. I mean, I like comics. I had comic collections. They were superhero stuff, but I
Sure.
also like watching slice of life kind of things and into mangas. And when I
Yeah.
read some of your stuff, I was like, oh, that's pretty hilarious. There's one about drunken death, and he talked about how he thinks everyone's shitty, but he
Yeah.
still has optimism.
Yeah, that's a recurring character
That's
in
that's
Decades of Experience for sure.
that's pretty
And
cool.
that's kind of his character. Is he's, or I don't even necessarily prescribe a specific gender to it. It's death, so it's probably genderless. But it's his character who, that's their sole purpose, is to take lives,
Hmm.
and to be able to stay optimistic through that being your role in life, I think is an noble and kind of entertaining thing. So it's been a fun
Hmm.
character to play with.
Nice,
Might
nice.
have to cross over to Mr. Butterchips.
What do you have, like? Do you have a goal of what you would like it to become? Whether it's a motion picture in the future or keeping it indie with a small loyal fan base.
Yeah, I mean, I think a loyal fan base, maybe enough to make a living, would be fantastic.
Hmm.
And that's sort of lofty thinking, but that'd be great. I don't typically think in terms of adaptations to other mediums with my work. If we could collect it as a graphic, or not as a graphic novel, but as just a collection of the book of the pages, and put that out as a book, and people enjoyed it, that'd be great. Same thing with Mr. Butterchips. I would love to collect those. It's the monthly strips, and they're very episodic, so they don't necessarily have to go together. Kind of like Decades,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
putting if I could put books out, collections of those at some point, that'd be fantastic. And I have a couple of opportunities coming up with graphic novels, so we'll see how those pan out. And if I could, be writing books for a
That's
living, that'd
awesome.
be that'd be my
That's
epitome
awesome.
of life.
Yeah, that's awesome. You're keeping writing content, putting in the grind, doing a lot of collaborating. Oh, you didn't talk about Mr. Butterchips and what that was
Yeah, that's
about.
just it's a satirical comic strip, so it's very political and sort of more social commentary, far more so than Decades of Inexperience.
Hmm.
And the protagonist is a organ grinder monkey, an anthropomorphic organ grinder monkey. And for me, the best thing about that is he's this little curmudgeonly shit of a monkey. But the best thing about him is I can say things like railing against gun violence or homophobes or something like that. And when it comes out of the mouth of a cartoon monkey, it makes it a little more palatable. And I don't think people get as angry as if it was somebody like a human
Right,
character saying.
right. Like Family Guy or South Park.
Right, exactly. So he's definitely been my vehicle, especially since the 2017 elections. He's definitely been my vehicle to voice
Mm, mm.
concerns and, yeah, far more social commentary and
I
editorialize, I
see.
guess.
So if anyone
Yeah.
has that same angst after the past election, read Mr. Butterchips and you
Oh yeah,
might.
he's got your back,
He
man. He's
got your
got your
back.
back. Yeah, I mean, it sounds very like a very funny concept because it's a monkey who's tackling these larger issues, but we go from everything from racism to again homophobia, gun violence, the way that the government sort of keeps his people down, I guess, subverts what we can do and the power that we have. So there's a lot of pretty heavy topics that are covered. But again, when you have it coming from a foul-mouthed monkey who chain smokes and
Yeah.
shotguns whiskey, it's okay. It's
It
palatable.
gets a little funnier. I always say, if the world or if people in general had a bit more sense of humor, the world would be a different place, a better
Yeah,
place, I
that's
think. Too many
absolutely, and
people with sticks up their ass.
yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of the sort of underlying themes of Mr. Butterchips.
Right.
Is kind of takes it all with a sense of humor.
Yeah. Let me wrap up with a couple last questions.
Sure.
If someone wants to do your kind of work, what advice would you have?
set a schedule for yourself and stick to it. It's very easy, and not just with comics. I don't think. I mean, with music or any kind of artistic endeavor, it's very easy to fall out of a rhythm and have that idea in your head where, oh, I'll get to it tomorrow, I'll get to it next week. But if you want to build an audience, you have to be consistently producing. And especially if you're doing something like a web comic and something like Decades of Inexperience, where we've, me and Anti Express have put it out there that it's a weekly. If we start missing weeks, we're going to start losing readership because people aren't going to just wait around for you to get your ass in gear. So be consistent and be realistic about your I hate to use the word talent because it's so subjective in these kind of roles, but you do have to be realistic about that. And so don't just listen, if your mom tells you you're great and put your pictures up on the fridge, that doesn't mean you're a good artist.
Damn it, Mom, you tricked me.
I know.
You made me think I had talents.
Same thing happened to me for many years, my friend. And then I went to conventions and started talking to professional artists.
You're like, damn, I have to step up my game.
Yeah, you got to get outside opinions, and you have to, seek out professionals, and especially in like writing in comics, speaking from experience, a lot of the pros are very approachable and are happy to answer your questions. You don't approach them in the guise of getting them to give you work, but if you're actually reaching out and asking for legitimate advice or maybe a critique of your work, most of the time you'll find that they're very willing to give their time. Mm-hmm. But you also have to be ready to take their opinion because it's not always going to be what you want it to be. It's always going to be great or complimentary. So, I would say be realistic about your ability and just be consistent. And that's, that doesn't mean success, but it puts you above most of the other people who just talk about doing things and never actually put pedal to the metal.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. You're spitting fire just there. I like it.
Nice. The fire water.
All right, let me ask this last question because on your Instagram you put you're a drinker. What's your favorite kind of drink?
Oh, whiskey for sure.
Oh yeah, nice.
My
buddy had got a whiskey collection, and we were sipping different whiskeys every day. My favorite was Scotch. At first, I couldn't tell the difference, and then later on, I found out, I really like a Scotch, like a Glenlivet. And he got so much to the point where we're literally never gonna finish this.
Right. That's a good way to have it, though. Have that stockpile. And if you drink enough of them and enough of a variety, you can definitely tell the difference. And I've actually gravitated more towards bourbon these days. Mm-hmm. But I'm also broke, so I buy the cheap.
If I ever get you a gift, I know I'm going to get you. But the Kentucky ones, I think there's one called Eagle Rare.
I've never heard of it, but I will be forever grateful for a gift of whiskey.
So it'll come in the mail.
Awesome.
All right, really cool. If someone wants to get a hold of you or see your stuff, tell us, what's your handle, what's your website?
Website is alexschumacherart.com, AlexSchumacher art.com, antixpress.com, which is where you find the new Decades of Inexperience, decadesofInexperience.com, which is where you find the archives, drunkmonkeys.net, which is where you find Mr. Butterchips, and a slew of other places like Antarctic will have the guitarist. But the two main ones are, I'm on Twitter at AJ Schumacher Art, and same handle at Instagram. So I have all those places.
It's a handful. I felt like I was listening to a spelling bee.
I know you were starting to pass out. I saw your eyes.
I took a little nap. I'll put all the links in the show notes and descriptions of everything. Excellent. So people could find it.
Very cool.
All right. Really a pleasure. Listeners, thanks for listening. Hopefully you got some insight. If you're interested in drawing, making comics, listen to Alex, put in the grind, keep putting content out there, connect with him. He sounds like he's a great guy. He's very, sounds like he's always willing to give advice, give some insight. So
especially if you buy me a drink.
Yeah, yeah. Especially if you buy him a drink, he'll be very helpful if that's the case. My next guest will be a friend of mine. His name is Mike, and I've known him for a while. He works for a energy corporate company, and he's an account analyst. And we're going to talk about basic 9-to-5 jobs, what it's like, work-life balance, finding meaning in that kind of work, and whatever shit we talk about. So that's the next podcast. Once again, thanks, Alex, for joining us.
Yeah, thank
Everyone,
you.
You have a good night. Take care.